It's not calling you Josh Frydenberg, it's calling you Dosh Frydenberg.
Under the Coalition, taxes for hard-working Australians will always be lower.
You know, I don't hold a hose, mate, and I don't sit in control room.
They're answers that only can come from Victoria, I'm afraid, because that's not my job.
But I ain't spending any time, mate, because in the meantime, every 3 months, a person was torn to pieces by a crocodile in North Queensland.
Well, g'day, listeners, and welcome once again to the Two Jacks. It's episode 113, where we look at matters political and media in Australia, and then have a good look around the rest of the world, see what's going on there. And joining me, as usual, is Hong Kong Jack, all the way in Hong Kong. How are you, mate?
I'm good, mate.
Nothing to report on Hong Kong.
No public holidays this week.
No public holiday on a Monday. Gee whiz, that's a bit much, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, as we record this on the 13th of May, Tuesday the 13th of May 2025, the Liberal Party have met and have elected a new leader, Jack, and that is Suzanne with 3 S's. Sussan Ley is the new boss, and a bit of a shot out of the blue there. Her deputy is Ted O'Brien.
Yeah, the Suzanne with the multiple S's has something to do with numerology, I think.
We'll get to that, Jack. We will get to that and her comments on that. 29 to 25.
Yeah.
Pretty close.
Yep.
Angus got rolled. He has called for unity, Jack. Unsurprisingly, he's called for unity, as has Jacinta Price, who squibbed it, Jack, today. She seems like she didn't put her name up or put her hand up at all. So
Ted O'Brien's an interesting choice.
Out of the blue.
His seat's on the Sunshine Coast.
Yeah,
and he comes from a Fairfax, I think the seat's called. He comes from a family of kind of like a flour milling dynasty, but he's worked in a lot in Asia.
Yeah.
He lived in Hong Kong for a while, Beijing, studied Mandarin at the university in Taiwan.
Okay, I do apologise. Yes, his opponent for the deputy, Phil Thompson, is from Herbert. He's an ex-ADF background. He had a modest swing towards him. I didn't check O'Brien's seat.
Yeah,
fairly safe though.
He's got a degree from Queensland from the LSE, London School of Economics, MBA from Melbourne Uni, and he's only 51, so might be a bit of promise in that.
He was in fact in charge of selling the nuclear policy, Jack, which is probably handing him a bit of a dud to get him going. So that it'll be interesting to see how the Nats have obviously put their hand up to continue the nuclear policy, and I suspect the Liberal Party, the senior party of the coalition, will. They certainly won't be going for the big outlay that they took to the last election. I think their position might modify to a view that the ban on nuclear energy be lifted, so we can throw those options into the mix if we so desire at some point. I think that they'll move from the policy actual to the philosophical, Jack.
Yeah, and I think that's a winning policy, actually.
I think so too, except to say the Nats have been pulling they've been pulling the horse, the cart that pulls the horse, a fair bit on energy policy.
Not for the first time in history.
No, but how do you stare them down, Jack? It's sort of David Littleproud. He was re-elected as leader. Had a little bit of a challenge. And the challenge was, it was Matt Canavan saying he was going to get rid of net zero by 2050, I should say. And Littleproud has thrown that possibility open as well. And I suspect that would be a disaster for the Libs if they went down that track, Jack.
When the history of this is interesting. In the Fraser government from 1975 to 83, 2/3 of the heft and gravitas and heavy lifting was the National Party. There were
been like that for a long time, Jack. Hasn't been like that for a long time,
no,
Jack.
But well, they've always had one or two good ministers, generally speaking. I mean, Fisher was a really good minister. But
keep going.
there's been a few. I quite like them.
Yeah,
I grew
know.
up with them. I grew up with them. So
Fisher's been fine. Fisher's, but we're going back a fair few years there. You wouldn't perhaps be so generous around Barnaby Joyce, who's been a leader off and on pretty much since Fisher retired. And Littleproud, well, they made the mistake, I think, and this is something the Libs will have to deal with as well. They're going to lose a senator through the electoral process in New South Wales, and they will also lose Jacinta Price, who will move over and caucus with the Libs.
Yes.
That means that the Nats have only got 4 Senate seats, and that challenges their major party status. It affects them in terms of funding. It affects them in terms of procedural matters, where they might have benefits in the past as a major party. They won't have any anymore. And I just think, I just think they look at the Libs and say, you're the ones who got us into this position, but they're not accepting any responsibility themselves.
No. And the loss of the major party status will hurt. I think there'll be no corner office and all that kind of stuff. But...
yeah, and a fair bit of dough involved too, mate. Electoral money, so hundreds of thousands, if not millions. I did want to get to this numerology business, Jack. It is Suzanne Lee, the opposition leader, Sussan, but she wasn't born that way, Jack. She was born a Susan with just the 2 S's. She said about this, she changed the spelling of her first name. I read about this numerology theory that if you add the numbers that match the letters in your name, you can change your personality. I worked out that if you add an S, I would have an incredibly exciting, interesting life, and nothing would ever be boring. It's that simple. And once I'd added the S, it was really hard to take it away. Now, you're Jack with 2 Ks because you wanted to switch things around and become a far more vibrant, interesting person.
Well, to be fair, you and I were christened John and Peter, as indeed your father, who I'm named after, was christened John, but we're all known as Jack, so we shouldn't complain too much about someone altering.
Yeah, we haven't actually got around. We're adding names, but we're not adding letters to names.
No,
Jack.
that's right.
That's the important distinction. Yeah. It's very strange, but look, we're in the business of religious tolerance here, and if you want to be a numerologist, I say knock yourself out. Final question on the opposition, Jack. What will their review, how would you conduct their review if you're in the party room?
I would have someone outside the party room do the review.
And should it be made, I believe one of the mistakes they made in 2022 was not make that report available to the rank and file.
Well, they should do that.
Yeah.
It should be done from outside the parliamentary party.
Yes, agreed.
Who are too caught up in it and have other things they should be doing, and then it should be shared with the wider party membership. They've got to bring the party membership along with them much more than they currently are.
Agree. Yeah, agree.
And I would say from their perspective, generally speaking, things are not as bad as they seem, and nor is things as good as they seem in politics.
Well, we talked about 1996, the end of the Hawke-Keating governments and the belting that Labor copped at the hands of the Howard coalition government, elected in 1996. I got to as far as they had 94 seats in a 144-seat parliament, Jack, in 96. So that is as bad as it's been for an opposition, certainly in my memory. I didn't go back to 1975 because you probably only had about a 120 seat parliament in those days. But the most seats ever obtained was in 1996 to the Howard government, and they got 94 of them. Labor has 93 in this parliament, 150 seat parliament. And we're seeing still some votes to be counted, I don't think Labor will increase their seat count at all. It looks like Longman is tilting towards the LMP, the sitting member there. And there are some other battles going on, including the one in Bradfield that we thought the Teals might do quite well in, but that looks like it's going down to the wire, and maybe the Libs will pick that one up. That will inevitably give them about 45 seats. So the wash-up is, as far as we can tell at this point, election, the two-party from third was 55-45. In fact, it's 54.9 to 45.1. So we'll round that up. And that's a swing of 2.8% to Labor, Jack. Pretty much all at the expense of the coalition.
Yeah. The other thing they've got to remember when they're doing the review is that 6 weeks out from the election, they were really competitive. So when you're going back to look at what went wrong, that's about the starting point.
Yeah. Look, I do want to briefly touch on The Voice, because while Peter Dutton and Jacinta Price and others who promoted the no view were regarded as triumphant, victorious after the referendum, and Albo in turn suffered a lack of perhaps confidence in his leadership, that's all sort of rounded, that's just sort of flipped as we've gone on. And that perhaps there's certainly an argument that the no voice for the referendum created a bit of a delusion in the coalition that they were in pole position to take government.
If they thought that was a mistake, the Voice would have lost. Firstly, it was a terrible idea. Secondly, the campaign and the way it was conducted was even worse. But it would have lost if Peter Dutton said he supported it.
Not so sure about that, but anyway.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, 60% of people voted against it.
Well, that comes. I mean, look, we can hypothesise as much as we like, but my view is that they took that victory and thought that it was going to be very easy for them to get power. Now, it wasn't much longer after that some of our polling companies, including Costamara, people in the polling companies, including Costamara, were saying, really, there's only two options. And this is in 2024. There's only two options, and that is a Labor minority or a Labor majority. And I think the coalition lost their way, perhaps by The Voice, but also, we talked about the campaign. We won't go over that again, except to say there were so many thought bubbles there that were presented as policy. It was an absolute shambles.
Yeah, but let's just say about The Voice. The no vote amongst Labor voters was really, really high. This was not a Liberal victory. This was a victory for nearly 2/3 of the population. So if they took the lesson from that this was going to carry them to victory in an election, they were mad.
Yeah, I think there was certainly an amount of delusion that arose then, and then it got much, much worse in the early part of this year when they were sort of given the nod in the polling and thought they could just cruise with a sort of small target, and it just got worse and worse after that. But we won't. We'll leave these people alone to their pain, Jack, because we have a new cabinet. A new federal cabinet, and it's been a pretty bloody process. Now, I would argue that Ed Husic and Mark Dreyfus should still be on the front bench, but of course they're not because of a factional power play. The left has more representation in the caucus than the right does, particularly from New South Wales, and that's why Ed Husic got the flick. And as he went out the door, he described Richard Marles, the Victorian right-wing factional broker there, Jack, as a factional assassin. He got Ed right between the eyes anyway, which I'm not laughing. I mean, Ed Husic was a very good minister in my view.
Yeah. The way that the Labor cabinet or Labor ministry used to occur. Back in the Whitlam days, they were elected and then the Prime Minister appointed them. And Whitlam had no cabinet and outer ministry. I think there were 27 of them. So the cabinet was effectively a cabinet of 27.
Right.
And that worked about as well as you'd expect.
Yeah.
It was a debacle. So
but
Hawke
the leaders
insisted upon a cabinet.
The technicalities about Labor are quite different from the Libs. Is that the leader really has to abide by what goes on in the factions. However, I would argue that given the extent of this victory, Anthony Albanese had the authority to jump on this and keep Husich and Dreyfus in the ministry.
Yeah, well, Kevin Rudd tried to adopt the Liberal method of the leader.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
leader appointing
in 2007,
and that was unpopular with the people. They don't actually hold a formal vote anymore. This is in fact decided by the cabinet, by the faction leaders, rather than by
that's right. Yeah.
Rather than by a vote.
That's a good point.
It certainly would have been possible, in my view, for a prime minister with a stonking great majority like this to call the faction leaders into the office and have a little chat and say, well, you're going to have to arrange to find a way for Husich and Dreyfus to stay.
Yeah.
That's a starting point. Now, you sort it out amongst yourselves what else you do, and I'll have a look at it. But that's where you start from. And he chose not to do that.
He chose not to do that. He could talk about renewal and all these sorts of things. I thought Dreyfus did a very good job under enormous pressure in the previous Parliament as Attorney General. I don't think either of these men could say that they lost their jobs because of ineptitude or incompetence, because when we have a bit of a scroll down through the outer ministry, Jack, the first one we see, well, not the first one, but the third one we see is Andrew Giles, Minister for Skills and Training. He want to develop a few skills himself first, maybe do a bit of work as well.
He's the chap who hadn't read the briefing notes on anything, really. You know,
that's right. Yeah. Well, if you're going to ignore just one, you may as well ignore the lot and plead ignorance on everything. So there's Andrew Giles. I see Jenny McAllister's there, Minister for National. She's the Minister for the NDIS. That is not in the cabinet. And she's done pretty well for herself, Jenny McAllister. She's an old Swannies fan, of course.
Yes.
But we do see when we scroll through this cabinet and outer ministry list, we've got Don Farrell there. He's the Minister for Trade and Tourism, Special Minister of State. He's a factional warlord from way back, Jack.
Yep.
She's got the plum job too, isn't he? Minister for Trade and Tourism. You wouldn't have to buy a drink there for the next 3 years, as long as the Prime Minister's reasonably happy with him.
I had lunch here a few years back with a then South Australian minister, and he had tourism, trade and sport.
Yeah.
And I thought I would sign up for that tomorrow.
Yeah.
I make this because all the tourism and trade in South Australia is eating and drinking related, and they just finished the Adelaide Oval. So, yeah. Beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and Mark Butler, of course, who we mentioned before, some factional heavyweights there. Tony Burke, I wouldn't call him a factional heavyweight, but he's certainly a member of the New South Wales Right. What happens, Jack, when you become a special envoy? What does that mean exactly? Here we've got Susan Templeman, who's the special envoy for the arts. Kate Thwaites, quite a famous name, member for Jaga Jaga in the Victoria Labor Party. She's the special envoy for climate change, adaptation and resilience. And a member of the New South Wales Left, a member for Gellibrand, Tim Watts, has been made the special envoy for Indian Ocean Affairs, Jack. Wouldn't keep him real busy, would it?
No. I presume you get more lolly with this, but I can't see.
Definitely.
I can't see the point of it otherwise.
Well, of course, we might remember that the former leader of the National Party, Barnaby Joyce, was a special envoy for bushfires, Jack, and he reported back to Scott Morrison by text. Yeah. Keep it brief. Keep the paper down. Keep the paper down. Not a lot of change there. Good to see Dan Rappuccoli has been named a special envoy for men's health. And did you know, Jack, Dan Rappuccoli is 6'8" tall. He's a mountain of a man, but he will be the second tallest man in the caucus room. Jack, Matt Smith from Leichhardt is 6'11". And as I mused on Talking Picks on Sunday morning, I don't think the Labor Party basketball team can be beaten. No. I think they're going to be very, very good. So what are the chances of Dan Rappuccoli being outsized? But that's exactly what's happened.
Mm.
All righty. I must say, while we've moved on from the Susan Ley thing, our very good friend of the podcast, Baseman, has weighed in on the Liberals. On the Liberals' leadership transition, Jack. And look, he should have had a few bob on this. He said, I still reckon, he wrote this yesterday, I still reckon Ley, Susan Ley, will be looter leader. He calls the Liberals looters. It's a given. There is no way they can choose Invisible Angus, who was slaughtered daily by Chalmers. Lots of pluses for her. First woman looter leader, worked her ass off all her life. Cooked shearer in sheds, completed a couple of degrees at night whilst working and rearing 3 kids. Worked hard for a commercial pilot's license. Seems a bit of a rap for Susan Ley, Jack.
I don't think she's a bad. I mean, you never know until you give these people a run at the job whether they're going to be up to it or not. But she doesn't seem a bad choice to me. Probably a better choice than Angus Taylor, I think.
Well, we did see some of the perhaps the Sky News crazies saying that if Ley was chosen, it meant all was lost, and the Liberal Party had moved to the centre rather than to the depths of conservatism.
Yeah, I don't pay much attention to them.
I don't pay much attention to that either, but it was quite interesting to see, and I have seen a few of the other Sky News folk who've weighed in and said, these people, they said of them, they just never learn, and you go, look. You do know that elections are won in the centre, don't you? You do remember this, don't you?
Yeah. She manages to do pretty well in Farrer, which is a strange sort of seat. Runs all the way from Albury up to Wentworth, Mildura.
Yeah, that's right. She lost Albury in this election, Jack, and that's not a great sign, I would think. But we'll see how she gets on. We wish her well. Quick reminder, Jack, perhaps Paul Keating, when he looks back at his political parliamentary career, he might have thought twice before he destroyed Alexander Downer as an opposition leader, and that, of course, kicked him out of the job, brought on a party room spill, and John Howard took over after that. In fact, I think Downer resigned.
Downer did resign, yes.
And I guess the view afterwards was maybe you should have gone a bit softly on Alexander and then have a crack at him during a campaign.
Yeah, I thought that at the time, to be quite honest. He was always going to beat Downer, but
must have been very tempting to keep going though, Jack.
Yeah. Speaking of Paul Keating, if you want an up-to-date view of where the Australian economy is, Alan Kohler on ABC Online sets it out. He goes back through the history of the tax summit back in 1983.
The one that recommended a GST, but Bob wouldn't have it.
Yep. And this is Keating himself. I'm a risk taker, but the country had its legs pulled for 30 to 40 years. The place was massively uncompetitive with declining terms of trade. Who else was going to blow the whistle and take this basket case on? And Keating went on to say, my key point was that you could not bring the economy back to growth off the back of public investment and public employment. The primary driver had to be private investment and private employment. And that would describe the Australian economy at this time in 2025.
Well,
if they don't start working, Jim Chalmers is talking about making productivity an important thing, but it is the only thing. It is the only way back for the Australian economy. The only way to fix its problems is productivity.
Yeah, and it is not just as easy as saying, well, everyone works an extra hour.
No, it's not.
It is
not
a
that
lot
easy.
more complicated than that. As we've mentioned on the show before, this is locked into housing. I mean, if people are having to live in affordable housing 40 kilometres from their workplace and having to travel a couple of hours there and a couple of hours back, those people aren't going to be so productive. So housing comes into this issue too. I think housing is the big issue for the Labor government going forward, and they'll be measured, I think, quite brutally by it. There are no longer any excuses of the Greens getting in the way, Jack. Speaking of which, they look like they will have. I think Ryan has now been declared the southern Brisbane seat, or south of the river, inner city seat of Ryan, and the Greens member has been re-elected there. One of the hyphens, Jack, I can't remember her name, but we probably shouldn't bother too much about learning it. It's just one of the hyphens. She's the hyphen. Yeah. Their votes pretty much stayed the same as it was in 2022, particularly around the Senate. They will have the 12 senators, and they will have the balance of power. How do they handle their relationship with the government now, with the Albanese government? It was very, very contentious, argued, too much noise coming from some of the Greens, particularly around housing. It just locked up the Labor's policy in the Senate for a year. They've got to be more conciliatory than they have been, surely.
They've overestimated their importance and power.
Yeah, and they need to take a new tack. So they will have to sort out their own leadership. Care to give us? I think Sarah Hanson-Young's probably the next one in line. Wish Wilson, another. Well, there's hyphens everywhere. Is the other one considered a candidate? We'll see. But they need to be more conciliatory. They need to understand the sheer mathematics of the parliament now.
They have influence, but not power.
Yeah, that's perfectly put. So they don't have an agenda, or they don't have a mandate, I should say, to pursue their agenda. They don't. Yeah. They simply don't. And the rest of it just comes through negotiations with the government. But they should not be blocking things like housing policy.
Intelligent minor parties understand that.
Well, yes. Are there any?
No, there have been some quite successful crossbench parliamentarians in Australian history in the Senate, but the Greens don't seem to get where they fit.
All right, fair enough. We did have a look at Jacinta Price, Jacob, very, very quickly before we move on to other matters. Has she got tickets on herself, but the concert hall is empty?
There's a bit of that. There's been a bit of, as always, post-election, there's a lot of that going on. The Prime Minister thinks he walks on water, and she thinks that because she did a pretty good job in a referendum a year and a half ago, that she can do no wrong. And neither of those are sensible approaches.
All right. Well, as the white smoke filtered out of the National Party and Liberal Party rooms over the last couple of days, we did see...
Can I just say, post-1996, John Howard had a period of hubris as well. He was jumping on the television every second night talking about my government, and quite a few people were saying, no, son, it's our government.
Yeah.
So you can get that.
Look, that is Labor's perhaps great weakness at the moment, hubris, and it may not be something that comes from the senior leadership, but in the party room more generally, they're going to look out across from the Treasury benches to what are some fairly small numbers opposite them. So that can lead to some really bad decision making, and this sort of sense that that they are the natural party of government and all this sort of stuff.
Yeah, when you start telling yourself that, then you're on the downhill slope already, I think, if you start telling yourself that we're going to make ourselves the natural party of government.
Can I just work through this white smoke metaphor one more time, Jack?
Sorry.
Oh, no. I think it's been done. So now we have a new pope, and that happened last week, of course. Pope Leo the 14th went by the name of Robert Francis Prevost, and he was a Chicagoan. We'll get to that in a little while. He is an American citizen. He also worked in a mission work in Peru, so he's also a Peruvian citizen. And I think we sort of mused last week, well, it might have been the week before, how the bookmakers ever got a book together and how they could price these guys in. I really don't know, but he would have been very, very long odds. He would have been, he was a sneaky chance, I suppose, but that at best seemed to have a lot of support from Latin America and places like the Philippines. So we have a new Pope, Jack. And is he the woke Pope?
I don't know. I don't think anyone cares. Well, sorry. Non-Catholics care a lot about this because they see the Catholic Church as a social welfare and educational and political institution. And while it does all of those things, that's not what it's there for. It's not why it survived for 2,000 years.
Well, there were the Marga Brigade have taken a fair bit of umbrage to some of Robert Prevost's career as a priest, Jack. Donald Trump said that he was just very honoured that the conclave had elected an American-born man or cleric to become the next pope. And then people started doing some digging, including, the absolute fruits, the Laura Loomers of this world, who'd noticed that Prevost had made some fairly sharp remarks around the Black Lives Matter business in 2020. But the statement he's replied with, Jack, is when we asked the question, is Leo the 14th the woke Pope? He says, "To all who sent prayers, love, and hope as I begin this sacred journey, thank you. I accept this role not as a throne, but as a vow to serve the forgotten, to uplift the broken, to speak plainly where others stay silent. To be called woke in a world that sleeps through suffering is no insult. It is gospel with a capital G, Jack." Yeah, we'll see. According to Vatican watchers, Jack, he's not as progressive as his predecessor. And on the social media stuff, he's already been active. He's called for a ceasefire in India, between India and Pakistan, and that's now occurred. Whether they were listening to him, whether Muslims and Hindus were at war were listening to a Roman Catholic Pope, is anybody's guess. But I guess the real question is he, as a Chicagoan, is he a White Sox or is he a Chicago Cubs fan? And I do know the answer to this.
There's a lot of argument about this, and my friends from the Midwest of the United States were doing a bit of backwards and forwards on this. In fact, some of the stuff on social media from the Midwest has been very, very funny. But he's definitely a Sox fan. He grew up in the south side of Chicago, and I watched the interview with his elder brother who said, well, Mum was a Cubs fan, but then she came from the north of Chicago. This was kind of like a handicap, really.
Yeah.
So he's definitely a White Sox fan. The question was he there on Demolition Disco night in 1979? Because he's the right age to have been there. I don't know whether you've heard of this, but the Sox weren't going very well at the time, weren't getting good crowds in. So one of the people in the front office hit on this idea of getting a DJ who was quite famous for campaigning against disco. This was the height of disco in 1979. And this was a rock and roll station. So what he wanted to do was to open the gates at a White Sox doubleheader, and in between the two games, they were going to, if anyone brought along a disco record, they were going to demolish them in the middle of the park.
Right. Yeah, I
So
can see,
instead of-
you can see this going badly.
It's instead of having 15,000 or people in their stadium, they had 50 crammed in and more clambering over the walls to get in afterwards, the anti-disco fans. And this being Chicago, they were as full as a fat girl's sock, and the whole demolition thing was a debacle. It turned into a riot, and the second game of the doubleheader didn't take place.
The very fine line, Jack, between keeping an audience happy and starting a riot.
It is. So that's the real question that the Pope should be asked: is were you at the disco demolition night at Kaminsky Park?
Well, yes, indeed, and I can just say because he's not a Cubs fan, he's lost Bill Murray, and that could be critical as he goes forward.
But he grew up. He grew up in the south side of Chicago, which is I've got a couple of friends who grew up there, and it's
rough.
It's fairly Catholic. It's poor, very community oriented, all that sort of stuff. And as one of my friends said, he was sort of the end of that era where the parents couldn't afford to educate all of the kids, so a couple of them got punted off to the nunnery or the seminary for someone else to take over the job. So it was all common enough. I think he actually taught one of my friends when he came back and taught in Chicago for a while after his first stint in the seminary. So. A maths and physics teacher, by the way.
Yeah, extensive, really impressive educational background. Look, I guess the other question that remains, Jack, is the pizza to be prepared in the Vatican. Is that now going to be? Will they reject the Neapolitan pizza, or will they now, or the Roman pizza, and go for the Chicagoan deep dish?
Have you had a deep dish pizza?
Oh, it's just too much, Jack. It's just too much tomato sauce.
Yeah.
I'm not a fan.
It's pretty awful. So social media's been full of will the Eucharist be deep dish? Which I thought was quite good. And the other thing is, are they going to replace the communion wine with Malort? Have you tried Malort?
That'd be some terrible bloody booze from Chicago.
Yeah, it's a liqueur. It makes that German thing that sells in Australia, taste like Grange Hermitage. It's really terrible, And
the last time they had a Chicago,
I suppose when it's 20 below in Chicago and you want to drink, you'll probably drink anything,
The last time they had a Chicago bishop anywhere near the Vatican, Jack, it didn't end well. You might remember Bishop Melsinkus, I think his name was. A lot of money went disappearing through the Vatican Bank and into the hands of some ne'er-do-wells south of Rome, Jack, in Sicily.
Yeah. I can remember reading about that and said, the Vatican has a bank? How could that possibly end well?
I don't know whether you'd actually go there. Can I pull a couple hundred out today from the Vatican Bank? But that was a massive financial crisis, and they've had a few more since. All right, we wish Pope Leo XIV the very, very best as new Pope. Jack, New Zealand, will the last one out of New Zealand please turn off the lights? There people are fleeing the country, and not just those you might expect. The Kiwis are great travellers, of course, and so a lot of New Zealanders, when they hit 18, 19, 20, it's off to Australia and then off to Europe and around the world. But there's a much older group are now leaving New Zealand, and some for good.
Yes, indeed. The figures are quite extraordinary. What was it, 69,000 in the year to February 2025.
You've got to also remember this is a country of 4 million people.
Yes,
and I did see.
I think we should have a test before you're allowed to stay in Australia. Are you going to have big buffy blokes who can step? We need to improve our rugby team.
Yeah, if you're talking rugby, but I mean, I did see some population forecasts for New Zealand some years ago, and it's predicted that they'll never really hit 5 million.
No.
They can't really do it. Even with immigration, they can't really do it. They've got a negative birth rate. They're up there with Japan, in terms of fertility rate.
Yes.
And look, it's a lovely place. That's the first thing you notice when you get to New Zealand. No bloody people around. I mean, Queensland's a bit different, but go for a bit of a drive and you go, shit, there are no people here.
Yeah. When I first moved to Hong Kong, I met a Northern Irish fellow who had fallen in love with a Kiwi, and he said to me, look, we're moving to New Zealand. What do you think? And I said, you don't move to New Zealand. People move from New Zealand. But they've been there for 15 years and they're quite happy. So a couple of kids.
Oh, look, you could do worse than live in a country like New Zealand. Their real estate, and I did have a look at this while I was over there, particularly in the South Island, still pretty exy. But perhaps not Sydney prices around Queenstown it is. But if you look at places like Dunedin and Christchurch, it's still pretty expensive. And the other thing you've got to bear in mind, if you live in a place like Dunedin, which is a lovely, great college town, very vibrant, cosmopolitan, all that sort of stuff, it's the furthest city away from London on earth, Dunedin. So if you want to go anywhere in the world, it's going to take a long time to get there.
Yeah, well, one thing the Kiwis and the Aussies expats agree on is whenever Americans or Europeans start blathering on about, jet lag after flying across the Atlantic, we both, this is just nonsense. It takes us a day to get anywhere.
Yeah, and 2 days to get over it.
Yeah.
All right, very briefly, the Houthis have agreed to a ceasefire. President Donald Trump said that the ceasefire had been agreed to because the Houthis had bent the knee, Jack. Victory for the United States.
Yeah, it's hard to know how that's going to play out. The Israelis, I think, are a little bit concerned that the agreement by the Houthis not to fire missiles at various places and ships, etc., didn't extend to Israel. So that might require some adjustment. But I don't know whether you saw the video of the attack on the airport by the Israeli and American jets, but they weren't messing about.
No, the sort of kit they've got, Jack, hits very accurately. Look, I did see, and I wanted to discuss this, not in any great length today, but we do need to discuss this. There was a really poignant photo, image of I think a 14-year-old girl in Gaza, and she held up a photo, a 15-year-old girl, held up a photo of herself from a year before. And she looked fine, very, very pretty, well fed. And then you get to the person who's holding the image up, and she's just skin and bone, ribs pointing through her shirt, and in a terrible way. And I just think that the world is starting to sort of get blind to this, Jack. What's going on now in Gaza should not be happening. That's my view. And I think we need to devote a fair bit more time to it. I understand certainly the response from Israel to the October 7 attacks, but here we are almost 3 years later, isn't it? And getting on for that. And what we're seeing in Gaza is really just not acceptable.
It could be over tomorrow, of course.
Well, yes, you're talking about Hamas. I mean, I think they've just delivered the final surviving hostage.
No, they delivered one American, but they haven't delivered all the surviving hostages.
I thought that was the last one.
No.
Okay.
So it could be over tomorrow, but
I don't know.
And they choose not to.
I think Netanyahu thinks he's Churchill, and I think Netanyahu looked at what happened to Churchill once war stopped, and that will be the end of him. He's still facing trial for corruption charges. I just can't. The problem I've got, Jack, is I can't see anyone intervening, and I just see this as being one of these events around the world that brings great shame to basically all humanity, but we're just not even bothering about it at the moment, bothering to think about it.
Well, I think it's about to enter a new phase.
Yeah.
In that if the Israelis, if Hamas is not going to surrender, Israel's going to retake Gaza and going to control it.
All right. Then what happens, Jack?
I don't know.
I mean, the place has just been bombed to the shithouse. There's really no functioning society there. People are starving. Anyway, we're gonna move on. We need to have a bit more of a detailed look at that before we'll spend some time on this next week, so we can look at options as limited as they are. Meanwhile, Jack, in Ukraine, the European leaders have given Putin an ultimatum. He loves those, doesn't he? He loves a good ultimatum.
Yes. They met. I think quite a few of them. Macron and Merz and Starmer all met in Kiev with Zelensky.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
And an ultimatum was given, and I don't think there's been a definitive response. There's been a sort of a fudge response of saying, "Well, we want to restart negotiations from 2022 or something." From Putin.
Well, those that you're talking about the borders,
yeah.
In terms of returning to those borders, that's going to be pretty hard for Putin to accept. President Donald Trump, by the way, has threatened Putin with massive new sanctions if he does not accept the 30-day ceasefire plan, Jack.
Yep.
And I mean, you just got to wonder about how the Russians go particularly under Putin, when they get backed against the wall. I don't think they're in any mood for peace, and I don't think they really want it.
No, but I think that's certainly a possibility.
All right, and I think too, if they are looking at significant sanctions, I can only imagine Donald just thinking tariffs. They're not going to really work because they're not trading with the Russians, or they are a little bit, but not much. But it would be the sort of economic power brought to the Russians that I would think would be the only thing that would bring about their economy is tanking badly, by the way.
And
inflation is out of control there.
This is something the Europeans can do something about.
Yeah, but it needs global support. I mean, well, certainly it needs support of the United States and Europe. And if they do bring what are significant financial impediments on the Russian economy, that would be the only thing that brought them to the table. It would bring them to the table.
Yeah, and that's really in European hands as much as American hands. Germans particularly.
All right. Speaking of Germans,
stop
Jack,
buying the gas.
Well, look, Germany is going through a vast and rapid process of rearmament, not seen, I must say, since about 1935.
Yeah.
Conservative, and over $1 trillion Australian is being invested in military in Germany. In fact, their Bundestag had to vote to allow a debt ceiling to be increased to allow this to occur. In normal times, or perhaps in 1930s, the world viewed German rearmament with a sense of dread, but now it's all good. But now we have a Conservative leader, Friedrich Merz, has finally won the vote to become Germany's next Chancellor.
Yes, this vote's actually secret, I think.
It is, yeah.
So he lost the first vote and really didn't know for sure why. So, in true European tradition, if the vote doesn't go the way you want it, you just keep having the vote until it does.
But they did not accept votes from the ADF.
No. AFD.
AFD, I'm sorry. Yes, ADF. My God, AFD. Yes.
I don't think our people get to vote over there.
And so no one's accepting their votes, but they are the largest single party in the Bundestag. And this is causing problems with the Americans. Of course, Musk appeared with his gigantic head on a screen to speak to an AFD rally. J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio have both talked about this is undemocratic and all this sort of stuff because they are seeking, or the Germans are seeking, to basically create the AFD as a criminal organisation, Jack.
This is a really, really bad idea.
Yeah, it is a bad idea, not because we want to support fascists, and it clearly is a fascist party, but you've got to beat these people on ideas. You've got to beat these people and by outlining just how damaging they will be. And I think the German people, if the penny doesn't drop with the German people, then you'd have to ask where it's going to drop.
And if you don't, their biggest single winning issue is immigration. And if you don't do something about immigration, you'll lose.
Yes, we're going to get to the UK because we'll talk about this now because you just texted me a message. We're not entirely prepped for this, but Keir Starmer has said that immigration is on his agenda, and clearly there's an understanding there that immigration it's become a failed policy area for the UK for decades.
Yeah, he's done a complete U-turn on where they were on immigration before the last election. And this is partly as a result of the local government and by-elections that were held last week. And the polling since those elections is even worse. The most recent polling I saw had Nigel Farage's party, Reform, over 30, and the Labor Party and the
Labor about 27.
Yeah. So they're well in front of Labor, and the Tories are struggling into third place. So the politics has changed. It has changed in Germany as well. None of these parties are going to survive until they do something unless they do something about immigration.
We know Nigel Farage is a very, very good populist politician, but one thing, he just doesn't get enough criticism. So if you're going to talk, if the Starmer government's going to talk about immigration, that is giving Farage just a free hit. I don't understand why no one goes Farage for Brexit, which has obviously caused a great deal of constraint to the UK economy. And then when there's polling around that says who do you blame for Brexit, he's been number 78 in the list when he was really one of the ones driving it. And so I just think they don't quite know yet how to fight reform and how to fight Farage in particular.
Without Nigel Farage, Brexit doesn't happen.
Yeah, I know, and he should be held to account for that.
Yeah. The problem's not specific to the UK. This is happening right across Western Europe. That if you don't address immigration, the Danes, for instance, who are due to their reluctance to join the Maastricht Treaty, they have a special exemption from European immigration laws. So they're doing things like. If you're an immigrant who arrives in Denmark, they'll confiscate your wealth, your belongings, to put it towards the funding of refugees. They're driving people out of the country, right? This is not a right wing party. This is a kind of a centre right party.
Look, immigration's not an easy fix.
No. But it has to be addressed.
But it needs leadership, and it needs a leader. So it needs a leader that just doesn't respond to perhaps people's fears. London is one of the most successful multicultural cities in the world. So they've got a lot to be proud of in the UK, but there are real tensions there, and they need to deliver in terms of policy. But they also have to have that leadership that says, "Hey, come on, we're going to have people coming to this country, and we are putting our arms out to those people, but we're going to do it in a considered way."
Yeah, what you can't. I mean, Australia learnt this lesson 30 years ago. 20 years ago. What you can't do is have people arriving without documents. No one knows who they are and arriving irregularly. That's not a winning position anywhere.
That's the one that's almost impossible to fix. Otherwise, they would have fixed it by now. And not just Starmer, but his predecessors. And, they had the Rwandan plan, and that got knocked over in the High Court. And really, since then, the whole bit about, Australia has geographical benefits in terms of, Manus Island and Nauru and what have you, that just not afforded to the UK. So these things are easier said than done, Jack.
Look, I'm not saying they're easy, but unless that's addressed,
yeah, I know,
parties are going to lose.
All right, moving on.
We learnt that in Australia, in the 2000s, 25 years ago.
Yeah. Like I say, it needs a little bit of leadership to say, this is why immigration is important, but also to stop what we might call uninvited arrivals. South Africa, Jack, where I believe what we're talking about is hundreds of thousands of compromised birds. And I gather we're not talking chickens, or are we talking chickens, Jack?
We are talking chickens.
Oh,
this
right.
was a government-owned poultry enterprise with multiple farms, and they ran out of money, so they couldn't afford to feed the chicken. So the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals had to come in because the chickens were at the stage where they were eating each other, and they had to kill hundreds of thousands of birds.
And there's 200,000 birds at daybreak centres.
At one of multiple.
Contract grower. Well, without feed for days, resulting in mass cannibalism. The birds were over 28 days old but weighed under 700 grams. Now, your average chook, even the small one's about 1.2, 1.4.
Yeah. So as a country, they're at the stage where they're not too far off being a failed country.
Yeah, it's little things like that to sort of tell you. When these things are state-run, you can imagine, farmers there, or what are they calling them? What are we talking about? The contract growers, Jack. They'd just be taking the money and your beauty. Don't worry about anything like that. Very, very nasty story. In the United States, Jack, US, China have agreed to a 90-day moratorium on tariffs. I think the 10% are still in, but the tit-for-tat stuff is gone. Jack, may I just quote, because you won't have this in front of you, just quote from the Wall Street Journal editorial board. Rarely has an economic policy been repudiated as soundly and as quickly as President Trump's Liberation Day tariffs, and by Mr. Trump's own hand. Witnessed the agreement Monday morning to scale back his punitive tariffs on China, his second major retreat in less than a week. This is a win for economic reality and for American prosperity. Make that a partial win for reality. I'm still reading from the from the editorial. The administration agreed to scrap most of the 145% tariffs Mr. Trump imposed on Chinese goods on April 2 and later. What remains is his new 10% global baseline tariff plus a separate 20% levy, putatively tied to China's role in the fentanyl trade. So it's 30 for China. It goes on, Jack. But the deal is good for 90 days as negotiations continue. The tariff policy's been a shambles, hasn't it? It's just been an unmitigated disaster, really. And look, you've said we'll see, and we'll look at some agreements. The one that they were flagging was the UK agreement, and that was really a whole pile of nothing. And I don't think Donald Trump seems to have grasped the idea. I presume his Secretary of the Treasury, Scott Bessent, does, or has grasped it. China, Japan and South Korea own a great deal of US debt, whether it's in the form of bond yields or whatever it is, or form of bonds, not yields. They own an enormous amount of debt. And if push comes to shove, they can make quite a mess of the American economy. They would be, I guess, shooting themselves in the foot to some degree with that. But It's not. The idea that Donald Trump is negotiating from a position of strength on tariffs is for mine, just a nonsense.
Yeah, look, I think there are strengths and weaknesses across the board with that. The American consumer is an enormous strength. Getting access to that market is a huge benefit for everybody.
All righty. You would have seen, Jack, the arrest of Newark Mayor Ros Baraka, arrested at a federal immigration detention facility.
I did.
He was taken away and charged, I believe, with trespass, which is a misdemeanor. Just looks really ugly, Jack. Just looks really, really ugly. And the reports from that were that the ICE agency, Baraka just didn't. He had been protesting outside the facility for some time, for a number of days, but he was part of a group that had been invited to attend the detention facility in Newark, and so they just turned up ready to go, and then these sort of ICE guys went bananas on them and started making arrests.
I did see that.
Now, one thing you might think, Jack, is Baraka is one of 6 Democrats on the June 10 primary ballot. This can't be doing his chances any harm.
No, probably not.
And what about the $400 million Palace of the Skies, a gift to Trump from Qatar? I remember a blow-up. The nation of Bangladesh had given Hillary Clinton, I think, $700 worth of jewellery, Jack, and there was a massive blow-up, and she was told she could not keep it. But a $400 million burner, we'll just park it in the driveway.
We'll see where it ends up.
I mean, let me ask you a question, and I'm not going to hold you to this or anything. But let's say Donald Trump, this is all hypothetical. Let's say Donald Trump's polling doesn't get better and it gets a lot worse. And economically, there are major problems, global economy, US economy. Do you think there will be a presidential election in 2028?
Sorry, if his polling gets worse?
Do you think there will be a US presidential election in 2028?
Yes, of course.
You don't think there'll be any suspension of this? A lot of people are talking about it.
No, I don't.
Oh, okay. All right. That's all we needed to hear. What about the Surgeon General, Jack? The Maha, when we just touch on, we're just keeping a bit of an eye on little stats around the United States since Bobby Kennedy Jr. has become the health boss, the health czar in the United States. The little things we're looking at are infant mortality and life expectancy across various ethnic groups and the totality of Americans, Jack. I reckon within a couple of years you'll start seeing it go backwards. They've announced a Surgeon General who's not a practicing physician, Jack. She knocks out a bit of gear, I think, but not supplements. My understanding is that she's been knocking out some technology around blood sugar counts and things like that to help diabetic people. But she is obviously Bobby Kennedy Jr. is a supporter of hers, but she's pro-vaccine, Jack. That's got to spook the Maha Brigade, doesn't it?
I've got no problem with her being pro-vaccine, nor do I really care whether she's a practicing doctor or not, because these are political. These are political roles. They're not really, it's like being Attorney General in an Australian state or federally. You haven't really got to be a lawyer to do it.
You should, though.
No, not really.
We didn't actually touch on Labor's. Oh, no, I think absolutely you should. But you certainly, I think if you're going to be the Surgeon General, I would thought that there'd be at least a sense that you have picked up the scalpel in anger at some point.
Yeah, no.
She hasn't done too much.
Doesn't worry me at all, that. Yeah.
All right, tell her.
I mean, quite a few of the people who've been Attorney General in various states and in Australia have a law degree, but they're not really lawyers.
Oh, well, I think the Coalition had one in the Morrison government, Jack. He was not really a lawyer. I'm a bit surprised that you've taken that tack. I thought you'd always want jobs for lawyers, mate.
Well, there's plenty of them in Parliament, but there's plenty of people with law degrees in Parliament, but they're not really lawyers, most of them.
Yes, all right. Now, televangelist Jim Bakker will remember his...
this is important.
Yes, Jim Backer. Gee whiz, that face hasn't aged well, has it? I mean, he did stick a lot of plastic in there, but he's in desperate need. You know, he was involved in one of the great religious scandals in the United States. Jack, he and his wife Tammy, with those magnificent eyelashes, they basically cried and begged for our forgiveness, Jack, after knocking off a bit of money, but also being involved in various sex scandals. Now, Jim Backer says he's in desperate need of cash right now. And if he doesn't get $1 million, he will lose everything and be homeless.
Did you watch this video?
No, I haven't.
It was brilliant. He's being interviewed by somebody, and he's put along the listeners. You know, if everyone that watches this program gets will give $1,000, we'll be able to pay our bills, you know, and stay on the air, right? Because he's got a TV program. Otherwise, you've got maybe another month.
Oh dear!
So he was nearly in tears when he was saying this, and personally, I was jotting down the number so I could make a contribution.
Well, just look, he's got a lot of competition, and if one televangelist goes, he's very, very quickly replaced. Who's that terrible bastard? The old bloke. He's just announced he's had a compact with the Lord that he'll live till he's 120. You know, the bloke he gets around in private jets and things like. Can't think of his name now. Remember, he blew the COVID away, Jack. You remember? He goes, "Poof, that's blowing you away. That is the wind of God or something." Jesus Christ! You got to wonder how these people get involved. How idiotic you'd have to be to say, "Oh, yeah, I better give Jim Backer some money." All right, moving on to sport. The great
just before we move on to sport, I think you've missed an opportunity. No. I think it was May the 9th at the Mid-Coast Festival of Stories. You could have had an evening with Lisa Wilkinson.
Oh, just the one.
Yeah, just the one. Although I suspect this is the precursor to a tour where the whole country will get to do an evening with Lisa Wilkinson. You'll be surprised to know that the whole thing with Brittany Higgins and whatever his name wasn't her fault. It was the fault of 3 women in the 10 network who gave her bad advice.
Oh, well, there you go. So I'm glad that's been sorted out. I think we're still in the courts.
Yeah, Bruce Lehman's appealed that decision.
Yes, so. And the Linda Reynolds is also suing. I think she's suing the Commonwealth.
Yeah.
And
don't you worry, the legal profession.
So they'll be all right. As long as they'll be all right. As long as the lawyers will be all right, we'll be okay. Now we are going to move on to sport, Jack, because Virat Kohli, who is not a lawyer, has announced his retirement from red ball cricket, Jack. Certainly from Test cricket. Wonderful player, of course, and we've got some of his stats here. They might be a bit hard for you to read because I grabbed them off the table. Oh, no, they're terrible junk.
He averages 46 in Test cricket, doesn't he?
Yeah, and look, it was near 60, and he's averaged 32 in the last couple of years, which is not what he would want, and so he'd be a little bit disappointed about that. But, look, he's been a wonderful player, and I think his legacy as a cricketer, and as an Indian cricketer, is, you know, it's just his fitness and professionalism. He looks like he hasn't got 1 ounce of fat in his body, and then you look across at the Indian Test squad, and with a couple of exceptions, everyone's like that now too. So it's this sort of level of professionalism that he's brought to the game.
Greg Chappell tells a story of when he first went to be coach of India, and they were at the Cricket Club of India, I think it's in Mumbai, and they were doing a net session. And the first thing that happened was these flunkies brought out a cane-bottomed chair for each of the players to sit on while the thing was getting organised, and bought cups of tea for them and all that kind of stuff. And this was a surprise to Greg Chappell. He wasn't quite used to that degree of service at a training session. But and Collie they were lazy. Collie did change all that, and he made the team much more assertive, more aggressive.
Yeah.
And they won. I think his record's something like 40 wins and 17 losses, which is much better than MS Dhoni's or anybody else's, really. So
don't have his test wins as a captain. He's played 123 test matches.
40 wins and 17 losses.
That's a pretty good effort. I mean,
yeah,
very good, in fact. So his highest score is 254 out. He averages 46.85. As we've said, that's been on the decline for a while. He always maintained that he would not make up the numbers. If he wasn't contributing to his side in a way that he thought was effective, then it was time for him to move on. So he's not. There's no lap of honour or anything like that.
He doesn't need the money, I don't think.
No, he wouldn't be short of a quid. I think he is maybe number 1 or number 2 or 3 in the world in terms of Instagram followers, Jack.
Yep.
So a farewell to Virat Kohli. We'll still see him in the white ball cricket as much as can be played. And that leads us to what's going on in the IPL. We'll get back to county cricket in a minute, but a lot of...
They've announced that it's starting again on Saturday.
Starting again. They've all been told to get back. Cricket Australia has said for those Australian players who flew home, that they can receive support. They don't have to, go back. Of course, the coach of the Punjab Kings, Ricky Ponting, and he grabbed the Australian players in his squad and said, listen, stay. You're going to stay. And so they didn't even leave. And the Indian media were wrapping up Ponting and said only Ricky Ponting could have got away with that. Meanwhile, Mitchell Starc and his wife, Alyssa Healy, talk about their time. They were playing in Dharamsala. Starc plays for the Delhi Capitals. And they were playing in Dharamsala. And they were, Alyssa Healy tells the story, they were in the stands. Quite a big contingent of family and friends of the players. And then the lights went out at the stadium, that beautiful ground at Dharamsala. And then a very, very concerned sort of guard or security guy that they had said, we must leave now. And there was talk of perhaps a strike on the stadium. So that was a bit of a terrifying episode. Starc and Healy have come back, but... my understanding is that they'll go back and play.
It's going to be limited to 6 venues. I think it's Bangalore, Jaipur, Delhi, Lucknow, Mumbai, and Ahmedabad.
Yes, thank you. Well,
and there'll be double headers, so they're shrinking the geographic thing to make the security easier. So,
geez, they could play less games in the IPL. I'm not talking about just in response to the conflict. But it's for mine, it's just too big a season or too many games being played.
TV.
Yeah.
TV money.
Obviously, that's what it's all about. Yeah, and of course, the Pakistan 50 over, a T20 competition, they have all been scooted across to Sharjah, I think. But on reading this, because Dave Warner's playing in that tournament, on reading this, I think they're going back to Pakistan, Jack. We'll sort that out as we go along. All right. Now, Marcus Harris, Jack, he's been in blinding form. He's playing for Lancashire. It's his first run for that county, but he's played a lot of county cricket in the past. He's averaging 88.25 with the bat at the moment, after scoring yet another 121 against Northamptonshire. He scored 706 runs in the county season so far, Jack.
Do you put him in the World Cup team?
Well, he's not that far away. He cannot be that far away. And, let me ask you, what there are really only 2 possibilities. Well, I'll give you 3. Are they going to go with the young bloke from New South Wales, open him up? Despite the fact that he hasn't made runs for a long time. Are they going to go with someone like Marcus Harris, or are they going to try Cameron Green and the other big, tall Tasmanian all-rounder into that side? And that would mean possibly Labuschagne opening, or maybe even Smith. I hope not. And possibly even Cameron Green himself opening the batting.
I'd go with Marcus Harris.
Yeah, me too.
Tell the young fella go back and make some runs, and one of you two big tall fellas are going to miss out.
And that's just next month, by the way, too. Yep. So there's a lot of cricket being played around the world, short form. But the Test Championship starts on June 11th, Jack. I think that's when it starts at Lords, between Australia and South Africa. So we'll be following that. AFL, Jack, moving on to that, we got the wins and losses. It was a wonderful round of footy, actually, last week. I think the average over all the games, the average margin was around 10 points. I mean, so for all 9 rounds, that was the average margin. We had a draw. And we had some very close results. But we also get some people just wandering into the ground with guns, Jack. We had another one, just a kid who walked in with what was described as a facsimile firearm and a small knife. He was given a caution and come back next week. Come back to Marble and watch whoever's playing next week.
Whereas some dippy kid dropped his footy record on the ground near Aliir and got a 2-year ban from the SC2 Trust.
Yeah, it doesn't quite make sense, does it?
No.
Let's talk about umpiring, Jack, because I saw some absolute shockers on the weekend. Let me see. Probably the worst one was the Melbourne small forward.
The tripping.
Yeah. How could you miss that?
Yeah.
How could you miss it?
Yeah.
Look, there's 4 of them on the ground. Why we went to 4 umpires was that 3 umpires were having to run probably too far in the game and would become exhausted. So now they reckon they run about 10 kilometres over the space of that with the 4 umpires. So they'll average around 10 kilometres. So that's not an issue. But I'm just wondering if the 4 just doesn't work. If you've got the tripping on, I mean, I know this, we don't want to just pick things out, but Cuzzy Pickett got absolutely legged going into goals, and it was like, play on. How do you do that? So there's real issues around the game. The Carlton St Kilda game. Look, I think St Kilda got the perhaps a little bit of the rub of the green, but at the same time there was some astonishing sort of changes. The holding the ball rule is so complicated now that it's almost impossible for people to realise to recognise what's going on the ground, particularly around sort of congested play.
It's become a bit like scrum penalties in rugby. No one's got a clue what
Yeah,
happens.
it's a bit like that. So I think they need to go back to the drawing board with the holding the ball rule, and then you've just got this issue. See, I've always, not the last 15 years or so, I look at the AFL and I look at the sort of elite athletes who play the game, the highly professional people who coach and prepare those players, and then you've got the Umpires Association, which is full of umpires who are basically amateurs. Is that the answer, that they go to full-time work, become umpires?
Don't know.
Yeah,
But
I just think that there's not enough professionalism at that umpiring level, that we're allowing it to be sort of an amateur thing, and I just think that it would improve the umpiring if we had a group of, let's say, 40 or so umpires, all on contracts, rather like the cricket.
Yeah. There was a week ago, I think it was, the Bobby Hill rundown tackle that was paid as a trip. And I watched that slowed down, and I thought it was wrong, because I think the ball
wasn't paid as a trip. It was paid as a reckless tackle, in that it was driving the player's head into the ground. Is that the one you're talking about?
No. This is.
I'm sorry.
This is a Geelong Collingwood thing. and he gets him round the waist, and the ball comes out of the bloke's hand. So he's dropped the ball, and then then he slides down. It becomes a trip. And, you know, on a technical thing, I think that's dropping the ball because that's already happened, right? But all this happens at great speed. Bobby Hill's quick.
Yeah.
So I've got a fair bit of forgiveness for an umpire who gets that
Me
wrong.
too.
Yeah, gets that wrong because that's really hard to get right. But the trip in the goal square, the Cossie Pickett one, that was very easy to
shocker.
see. Yeah,
It was an absolute shocker. There were a couple there. I think St Kilda player ducked straight into it. What was even not quite high contact, and given a shot at goal. And I just thought, you shouldn't be umpiring if you give that as a free kick.
What used to happen, of course, is that they'd get a phone call on Monday and say, "Look, put your gear together because you're going to be umpiring up in Mildura on next weekend."
They don't do that anymore, mate. That's the other side of things. They really will persist with, and maybe they've only got a limited group. They do talk about the shortages of umpiring in lower level football, in suburban and park footy and amateur footy. Hard to get umpires to officiate.
So living up in the country, we used to occasionally get quite a senior umpire up there to umpire a game.
It doesn't happen anymore. It was considered bad form.
Normally meant they had a
I guess
shocker.
that's why they did it.
Normally meant they had a shocker the week before.
Yeah, they just don't do them. They just seem to mix them around again. One final question on the AFL, Jack. I'll give you two. The first one, there was a bit of controversy. I thought North Melbourne were terrific down in Hobart to hold the Brisbane Lions, the premiership favourites, if not Collingwood, they might be on the second line of betting, to a draw. And I guess overall you'd say North did well and the Brisbane Lions perhaps not so well. But at the end of it, there's still this sense of frustration that North didn't get a win, Brisbane didn't get a win. Should we be playing extra time in the AFL, Jack? Obviously, we do it in the finals, and I think that makes sense. I'm more akin with you. I just think when you get a draw through the home and away season, it should be a draw. In fact, the bookies pay pretty well on a draw, don't they?
I think they do. The reason we don't do it in finals is because it knocks the whole schedule out if you don't play extra time. But in a home and away game, no need.
No, I don't think so either. There was just the usual sort of media meandering. Okay, the other question is, Jack, and I'll just pull up the 8 at the moment. We're at round 9. And is it fixed? That is 8 now is Brisbane, Collingwood, Hawthorn, Gold Coast Suns, Adelaide Crows, Western Bulldogs, Geelong Cats, and the Giants at 8. Just outside, we've got Essendon, Carlton, Fremantle, and I guess St Kilda too. You could put them in there. Port Adelaide 13, Sydney Swans 14. Is that 9 fixed, or do you think there's room for a 1 or 2 to sneak in there? And if so, who's going to miss out?
I think the first 6 or perhaps 7 are finished. There might be one change. That's all.
Yeah, I think there's probably only one myself. I think, and look, maybe Geelong, it might be the Giants. That's the way it's looking. Western Bulldogs are too good a side to miss out, but it's it's not.
But they can be flaky though, can't they?
They what? Sorry.
They can be flaky. They can.
Yeah, they can be. They're a bit disappointing against the Suns on the weekend. But the Suns now up in Darwin, Jack.
They'll play finals.
They're 7-zip up there.
Yeah.
They go all right. I can't see any reason why they would drop off the map. And when we look at sides like Carlton, the draw's not too hard, but they've got to play Essendon, Hawthorn, Collingwood. Who else do they have to play? I think they've got to play Adelaide Crows and Brisbane Lions again. So for a side like Carlton, they're going to have to play out of their socks to make the 8.
Yeah.
All right. NRL, Jack. Don't know if you saw Latrell Mitchell for Souths.
The field goal.
big 50 metre, 49 metre field goal sealer over Brisbane, and there was Elbow in the rooms, Jack, having a bit of a back slap.
Yep. Was he wearing a Swans or a Hawthorn scarf, or was he?
No,
wearing
he had the South gear on. I must say, through the campaign, Russell Crowe chipped in about Anthony Albanese and Albanese's association with South Sydney. Crowe said Elbow was a life member of South, and he said every time I've ever asked him to pitch in, help out, attend a function, he said he's always been there. And the other thing he said about him is he always buys his own tickets, and that's actually a good thing. So he doesn't just put the hand out and say, "Listen, I'm very famous. Give me a few good seats." Pays for his own tickets, and I was quite impressed by that. It's finally, Jack, I don't know if you saw this, but the Storm have had a little bit of a rocky road in the last week or so. Beat the Tigers by 60. And one of the injured players from the Melbourne Storm list was turning around to the coach's box and saying to Craig Bellamy, "You can smile now. We're 60 in front now. You can smile." Didn't get a smile out of Craig Bellamy.
No, he's not happy.
And look, the Panthers are away now. We were reporting, I think, 2 weeks ago that they hadn't. They were on the bottom, the reigning premiers, and the best side in it for the last 5 or 6 years. Were on the bottom. They're not on the bottom anymore. But they are 16th, and they've gone backwards again. And we've got a very unusual lineup with the possible, in the first 5 or 6. With the possible exception of Melbourne Storm, who are perennial finalists, and maybe the Sharks too. Raiders are 4th. The Bulldogs, wow, there they are, and number 2 on the ladder, mate, New Zealand Warriors.
Yeah.
So that's going to be one hell of a season with some new faces there. Now that takes us out, Jack, unless you've got something silly to offer our listeners.
No, nothing silly. Nothing silly. Some
Yeah,
serious.
all right. Well,
some serious. I do have some serious news from Nigeria.
Oh my Lord! Here we go. Is it an email scam?
No. It was $45 billion found in a Nigerian man's flat. He had spent the last 10 years trying to give it away, but no one would answer his emails.
Yes, actually, I don't know where I saw that. It's not a true story, obviously, but I did see that reported somewhere or other. All right, thanks for that, Jack. And thank you, listeners, for bearing with us for one more episode. We'll get this out to you as quickly as we can. Just like Baseman, we would love to hear from you if you have got some comments you want to make, criticisms, whatever you like. Drop us a line on, you can hit us up on the Conditional Release Program at gmail.com. Or you can hit me up on Twitter. My DMs are always open. I'm at Jack the Insider, and Jack also has a Substack if you want to get involved in that.
Yeah,
Jack.
HongKongJack.substack.com.
Thank you very much, and that takes us out, and we'll be speaking with you later. All the best, folks. See ya.